Misty Valley Cooperative presents When We Were Gone Astray. The paths of the world twist and turn, taking you to unexpected places. Welcome to the haunted town of Assembly and to the strange lands around it. The days are growing shorter and the nights are chill. So put another log on the fire. Find a comfortable chair. Sit back. Relax. Listen. Chapter 8. Recovery. Doc Merritt kept Fletch in bed through the weekend, but Sunday evening he was up and about. On Monday morning he insisted on returning to school. His bruises attracted attention, even from people who were unaware of what had happened at the carnival. Fletch ignored the odd looks, but found he appreciated the unexpected concern. Silver and Renee began asking about the man at the spook house, whom several students had seen, but whom no one had recognized. "Maybe he's with the Ku Klux Klan," Renee said. "He could have worn his sheet to the carnival and fit right in." Fletch shook his head. "Scott's dad is in the Klan, and he said he didn't know him. The flyer wasn't theirs either." He took the copy Renee handed him and sniffed it. "The paper's weird. It's kind of slick, and the ink is funny. It smells purple, like rotten fruit." "Did you read it?" Silver asked softly. "Yes," said Fletch. "It's scary." He looked down at the blurred words. "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary to abolish the Negro race, proper methods should be used. Among these are guns, bows and arrows, slingshots, and knives. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all whites are created equal with certain rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of dead niggers." He handed the paper back to Renee. "It sounds, careless and idiotic, like it's meant to be a joke, only it isn't funny." Fletch wasn't surprised when he and Silver were summoned to the counselor's office during the last period of the day. "I don't think it has anything to do with school," Fletch told her. "The man was outside my house one night. Bad things have been happening over at Assembly, and we think he's mixed up in that." Miss Ahumada nodded. "But it did happen at the gym, Fletch, and at a school function. No one should be able to come in from outside and assault a student and then just disappear." She looked at him seriously. "The flyer he was passing out concerns me. If you and Silver run into any kind of prejudice at school, you need to let me know immediately, okay?" "Renee has been looking out for us," Silver told her. "I think she's decided to be our bodyguard." Miss Ahumada smiled. "Renee is small, but formidable. What you must realize is that not everyone will respect you the way she does." The counselor spread several black and white photographs on her desk. "This is the man I told you about," she said. "The paraclete at Pentadactylo. His name is Benito Scordo." The man was gray-bearded, dressed in a black coat that looked wrinkled and dusty. His black cylindrical hat struck Fletch as vaguely Greek or Russian, like something worn by an Orthodox priest. He sat on a low stone wall, bent slightly forward over a gnarled walking stick. "He looks like someone you wouldn't want to cross," Fletch said, handing the photograph to Silver. "And that's when he was smiling," the counselor told him. "At least I think so. It's hard to tell with the beard. These were taken when I was a child, around 1960, I guess. I believe he's still alive, though I have no idea how old he might be. He was middle-aged when my father was a boy." "I remember you said he helped your father during the war," Silver mentioned, placing the photograph on the desk and picking up the next one. "Yes, My father was an apprentice to the bell founder at Upper Bova in the Aspromonte. They had made a bell for the church at Pentadatello just before the British and Americans invaded. My father was young, but he carried messages about the German positions, and he was discovered. Benito and the priest hid him in the church. There was a kind of hollow between the floors, and they put the bell over the hole. It was a little bell, so no one could be hiding under it, you see. She looked down at her desk as if she felt shy about continuing. But they made them move the bell anyway, the soldiers, and there was only the floor underneath, the bare floor with no hole at all. She looked up at them. It was Benito. He had taken the hole from the floor and put it into the hole in his hand to hide it from the soldiers. She waved her hand. When my father would tell me that story, he would cry. When school let out, Fletch and Silver went to the bridge with more offerings, and discovered that word of the assault had traveled just as fast in assembly. Folk in the town had always shown Fletch kindness, but now he sensed a greater degree of compassion. This was no surprise, coming from the people he knew well, but several others whose names he could scarcely recall took time to approach him on the sidewalk. Doc saw them and came down to the bridge. "I came by to check on you at lunch, and your dad said you had gone to school. At your age, I'd have jumped at the chance for a free day." "Fletch is a serious scholar," said Silver. "I think he's aiming for a fellowship at Princeton." "Well," said Doc, "he's already teaching me a thing or two about physics. Did he tell you about the fireflies?" "Yes, I wish I could have seen that." "We were coming to check on the girl in the stream," Fletch told him. "Silver and I left some things for her just before Halloween. She has a kind of den under the bridge." Doc frowned. "Do you think she's camping there?" "I'm pretty sure she is. She left a cup and some marbles on our back porch the other night, and she delivered apples to Silver. They appeared right after we left some clothes for her and some things to eat." "You're sure those things came from her?" Doc asked. "Who else could it have been?" "Yes," said Doc, "I suppose you're right. Susanna hasn't seen her." He looked over the railing of the bridge toward the stream. "It's going to get cold tonight, and colder tomorrow," he continued. "It's odd. She's a stranger, and so is the man who lit into you at the carnival. I wonder if they're connected somehow." "I've seen the man in my nightmares," Fletch admitted, "and he knows stuff about Cotton Wills. Dad doesn't want me going out alone. He says I'm under medical restriction, but I think he's afraid I'll get ambushed." "I agree with your dad. I thought at first this might have been a random attack, but now I'm inclined to think otherwise." "It wasn't random," Silver said. "That man knew who Fletch was and picked him." The temperature dropped during the night, and there was a gray frost on the fields when Fletch awoke. Smoke was rising from the chimney when he and Silver arrived at the pastorium after school. They finished their homework in the parlor and drowsed on a rug by the fire, sharing a rag pillow, their fingers intertwined. Mark and Liz let them be, but about an hour before supper, Mark turned on the television set, and the room was filled with the incessant chatter of commentary as the polls for the presidential election prepared to close. Fletch groaned and covered his ears. "Come on," he said to Silver. "Let's get out of here." They took their coats from the hall stand, walked down the drive, and set off along the edge of the highway. Though it was not yet 5 o'clock, the afternoon was growing dim. Fletch dug his hands deep into the pockets of his coat. "What have I got in here? Coins, the stub of a pencil, a buckeye, and a pebble." "Sorry to drag you out here," he apologized. "The television was more than I could take, and lately it seems like there's always people around. I love them, but I had to get away." "I'm not people?" Silver asked. "You're different." Silver nudged him with his shoulder. "I remember the last time I walked this bit of highway with you." Fletch had been thinking the same thing. "You dragged me into the kudzu. Then I kissed you." "I remember the look you gave me," Silver said. "I think you were even more freaked about it than I was. I was scared you'd be angry. I didn't know how you'd react or how you would feel. I just knew I'd die if I waited any longer." They reached the lane that led into the trees behind the cemetery, and he drew Silver into the shadows. "I wanted to take you to the clearing tonight, but it's too far and too cold, and I'm too impatient." He took his face in his hands and kissed him. "I don't think you're too impatient." "That's good," said Fletch, "because I'm not stopping." "You're trembling." "It's November." He struggled with Silver's pullover, half laughing and half breathless. The laces of their sneakers ended up in knots. "I have no idea what I'm doing," he admitted. "Me either, but if you give me a minute, I think we can figure it out." Though Fletch had imagined this moment 100 times, he was still surprised at what a physical thing sex with Silver turned out to be. There was so much he wanted to express, but words had fled, and this new language of the body proved to be undisciplined and wild. In the chill of the air, Silver's skin was hot and alive against his lips, and as soft as silk. He refused to be still, and he refused to let Fletch be still. They laughed. They teased and tricked and finally fought each other to a place of mutual surrender. It was only afterwards, as they lay together, listening to each other's breathing, that Silver kissed him softly and told him that he loved him. By the time they gave in to the darkness and cold, the hour had disappeared. Had it not been for the light on the porch, they would have had difficulty following the edge of the road. "Next time we'll bring a flashlight," Silver promised. Fletch took his hand. "Next time we'll stay in bed. I think you've got dead leaves in your hair." "It's November." "I'm sure that's going to fly with our parents," said Fletch. "Are we just going to walk in? You know they're going to wonder." Silver shook his head. "No, they're going to know." They cleaned up for supper, and Silver helped Mark and Liz bring the meal into the dining room, while Fletch picked out a record by Ahmad Jamal to put on the stereo. "How's the election going?" Silver asked. "Abysmally, as I predicted," Liz told him. "We could pull up stakes and move to Saul's ward." "With Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister? No, thank you." "Reagan shucks around like a good old boy," Mark said, "but he's crafty. The Conservatives would like nothing better than to drag the country back in time about 20 years. "Buster Eves likes him," Fletch put in, "that preacher over at Quarry Ridge." "I hope the feeling's mutual," his father replied. "How about you guys? Have you been drawing flack at school?" Liz asked. "Not much," Silver replied. "We aren't exactly waving the rainbow flag." "I bought a rainbow pin in Savannah last summer," Fletch told him. "We could wave that." Mark shook his head, covering his face with his hands. "Seriously, Dad, we're being careful, and Miss Ahumada's been really kind." "All right," said Mark. "I just want you to be safe. When I got that telephone call on Halloween, the first thing I thought was that someone had hurt you because you were gay. It isn't like that, though. People actually like us. Nobody seems to care that we... Fletch felt himself blushing and mentally kicked himself. "That you sleep together?" Liz asked lightly. Fletch shot a look at Silver, who only grinned and shrugged. "Well, we haven't exactly announced that either." "Mark and I respect your privacy as far as that goes," Liz told him. "But we want you both to know that we love you, and you can talk to us. Things are different here in Assembly, but the outside world can be a mean-spirited place." Fletch nodded. Silver looked at his mother, then at Mark. "You guys must have been preparing for this conversation all week." Mark tilted his head in acknowledgement. "It's what parents do," he said with a sigh. "You want some ice cream?" A gift. Dwight Wills knew where Silver Kendall lived. He had passed by the driveway innumerable times on his bike, but had never turned into the deeply shaded lane with the split-rail fence. Even now he wasn't sure he wanted to talk to Silver, but something drove him to come this way now and then, perhaps just to catch a glimpse of him from a distance. Today, Silver was at school, so he didn't have to worry. He hesitated at the gate. The driveway was unpaved, rutted from the tires of Silver's truck and his mother's Volkswagen. Weeds grew along the edge, and the fence was covered in climbing roses. He knew the Kendalls weren't rich, but they were still peculiar. He was sure that whatever life went on up there would be alien to him. Dwight knew that most people disliked him, and he counted Silver among their number by default. Once, Dwight had almost approached him, having seen him with a copy of a book by William Faulkner. Curious, he had drawn close enough to recognize the cover of Intruder in the Dust. Silver had looked up, noticed him, and raised his eyebrows. Dwight had turned away, unable to speak. At this moment he felt equally nervous. He glanced at the paper sack in the front basket of his bike, and determined to follow the driveway at least far enough to glimpse the house. The bald tires bumped and skidded on the patches of gravel. The driveway was steep where it cut through the bank. Then it leveled and descended into a small valley with a stream. Ahead stood a log house, and beside it a terraced path that led through a grove of trees to a smaller glass-fronted building on the crest of the hill. Dwight stopped. The place was quiet, but he could hear the rush of the stream even from this side of the valley. After a moment's hesitation, he dropped the bike at the edge of the drive and continued the rest of the way on foot. Irregular steps of mortared stone led up to a porch of unfinished planks. A rooster on the railing gave him a baleful stare. Suddenly, someone was there. Not Silver, but his mother, a woman with dark hair and darker eyes. She was wearing a man's old coat and carrying kindling. "Hello, Dwight." She recognized him, which was startling. "Did you walk all this way?" She went up the steps, shooed the rooster away, and opened the door. "Come on inside, it's chilly." Dwight shook his head, feeling awkward and embarrassed. "I just brought some books," he said, "for Silver." "Books?" She looked at the sack gripped in his hand. "That's wonderful. He'll be pleased." Dwight handed her the sack. She took it, but instead of entering the house, she sat down on the porch and opened it, taking out the books one by one. "Faulkner! Oh, he'll love these." She opened the copy of The Hamlet, its cover torn and repaired with tape. "I remember this one. That scene about the horse they inflated with a bicycle pump. Oh, my God, that was funny. I thought I was going to die." She looked up at him. "You know, when I was in college, I ate Faulkner. Literally ate him." Dwight stared at her. "I would tear little bits off the edges of the pages and chew them up and swallow them, because I wanted to consume those stories. I'm surprised Granny Bundren didn't give me chronic indigestion." "Does Silver have them already?" he asked. "Only a couple. Intruder in the Dust and maybe The Unvanquished. I'm sorry you missed him." She waved her hand vaguely toward the highway. "He had school today, and afterwards I suspect he and Fletch will be off rambling. You know how they are." Dwight nodded. He almost turned, wanting to leave, but found he couldn't. "I know who did it," he said. "Did what?" Liz asked. But then Dwight saw her sudden understanding. "I wasn't at the carnival, but I heard about Fletch getting hurt. It was my grandfather that did it." "Crowther Wills," she said, puzzled. "Dwight, this man was young, and he had to be very strong." "He's not real young, maybe 30. He says time doesn't mean much. He's got some special kind of whiskey that helps him travel. I don't much like him. He's dangerous. I think he's worse than my dad." Dwight made himself stop. He knew he was making no sense. "I just thought Silver needs to know, so he can tell Fletch to be careful." "I'll tell him," Liz said. "Lord knows it's been a crazy enough year already." "I guess there must be two of them," Dwight said. "The old one up at the home and the young one who goes places. I don't know how he does it, but it's him." Liz nodded. "Your grandfather, Silver's grandfather." Yes, ma'am." "How old are you now, Dwight?" 14. She stood up. "Hang on a minute. I have something for you and your mom." Liz disappeared into the house and returned a minute later with a framed drawing. "It's just a sketch, nothing incredible, just part of the fence with the vines growing on it. Silver made the frame." She slipped it into the paper sack. "I'll tell him, Dwight, and I'll give him the books." "Thanks. Should he return them when he's finished?" "No," said Dwight. "He can keep them." "Y'all doing okay down there in the bottoms? Set with wood for the winter?" "I reckon so, pretty well." Dwight slipped the sack under his arm and walked back up the drive to his bike. $4,000 Winter. Forby was troubled. He had done what John the Conqueror had asked of him in his recent dream. The underground room beneath the empty Baptist church was now outfitted with clean sheets and woolen blankets, a propane camp stove, and a small supply of food and bottled water. Forby had cleared the ventilation shaft and placed an electric heater beneath it for warmth, running the cord to an outlet in the hall above. If Fletch found it necessary to flee from danger, this would serve as a fairly comfortable place to hide. Though it was late and he needed sleep, Forby was reluctant to leave the hidden room. He thought briefly of staying for the night. Perhaps here he would dream of John and discover whether anything more needed to be done. But as he looked at the neatly made cot, he found he was reluctant to sleep there. The truth was, even the thought of touching it made him slightly afraid. "What's wrong here?" he wondered. "I've done everything I know how to do." Forby lay down on the clean-swept floor and stretched out. The last time, John had been above him, like a comet in the sky. This time, he would surely be low, beneath the earth. Forby closed his eyes and said a rhyme about angels and apostles that he remembered from childhood. He slowed his breathing and waited, imagining his descent through the dark. Minutes passed, and at last the gate lifted, and the tunnels were before him, the deep mines of the ancient kingdom of old King Cole. He listened, and sure enough, he heard the deep voices of the beasts who were toiling in the mines. "How long?" he asked. "How long, O Lord?" In the distance the beasts answered. 4,000 winter, thought he not too long." Though Forby stood listening in the darkness, he failed to hear the tread of the grave king behind him, and when he sensed the other's presence, he dared not turn or even speak. A hand opened beside him, holding 3 bright coins. "These fell like fire from the sky." Forby waited. "Do you trust in God for liberty?" "I do," Forby whispered, hoping it was true. "Even in 1980? Forby's voice was beyond his command, so he simply nodded. "Then wait for the south stars. When they are in your hand, keep watch." When We Were Gone Astray is produced by Misty Valley Cooperative. It is the second book of the Forked Ways. The text and audiobook are copyright 2020 by Beau Farr, all rights reserved.